streetlights here. There are no gas stations, no emergency call boxes, no cell towers, no hospitals within reach. There is only the Dalton Highway stretching north through the Alaskan darkness, a narrow ribbon of gravel and compacted ice cutting across some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. And somewhere between mile 175 and the distant industrial lights of Prudhoe Bay, a truck driver has just pulled over into a roadside pullout, killed the engine, and begun the quiet, solitary process of settling in for the night. Outside, the thermometer reads 52 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Most people, hearing a number like that, cannot actually picture what it means. 52 below is a temperature at which exposed skin can develop frostbite in under 2 minutes, at which diesel fuel, the substance that moves nearly every product that sustains modern civilization, begins to thicken into a waxy paste and eventually refuses to flow at all, at which the moisture in your lungs can freeze on contact with the air if you breathe without protection. It is not simply a cold night. It is a hostile environment, the kind that kills without announcement, without drama, and without sympathy. And into this environment, every winter, hundreds of commercial truck drivers climb, carrying fuel, food, construction equipment, and industrial machinery northward along the 414-mile Dalton Highway, the only land route connecting Alaska's populated south to the oil fields at Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic Ocean. They park in pullouts where wolves have been spotted. They sleep in a space roughly the size of a large walk-in closet. And they survive. What most people never stop to consider is that sleeping at these temperatures is not simply uncomfortable. It is a logistical problem of genuine complexity. And the solutions that professional drivers have developed over decades reveal a world of engineering, discipline, and accumulated human knowledge that most people have never even heard of. To understand what actually happens when a truck driver parks for the night in Arctic Alaska, you first have to understand why pulling over here is not optional. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration mandates that property-carrying drivers may not exceed 11 hours of driving within any 14-hour on-duty window, and must take a minimum of 10 consecutive hours off-duty before driving again. This is federal law, tracked in real time by electronic logging devices installed in the cab. There are no exceptions for remote locations or urgency of cargo. When a driver's hours are exhausted, the truck stops, even on the Dalton Highway, even at 50 below. This means that a driver departing Fairbanks and pushing north toward Prudhoe Bay will almost certainly be forced to stop somewhere along the 414-mile route before reaching the destination. In winter, those grades are coated in ice. The Brooks Range rises across the middle of the route at Atigun Pass, Alaska's highest road pass at 4,139 feet, bisected by between 40 and 50 avalanche paths that state transportation crews manage using 11-foot artillery-style avalanche guns, shooting down potential slides to keep the road passable. Between the small community at Coldfoot and the industrial complex at Deadhorse, there is not a single town. The nearest hospital is either in Fairbanks, 200 miles south, or in Deadhorse, 200 miles north. When a mandatory 10-hour rest period begins, a pullout carved into the frozen tundra is what a driver gets. The driver settles in, draws the heavy insulated curtain separating the sleeper berth from the cab, and a question that sounds simple but is actually anything but presents itself. How do you stay warm for 10 hours when the air outside can kill you in minutes? The answer begins with a piece of equipment that most Americans have never heard of, and that the trucking industry has spent the last 2 decades refining into one of the most important survival tools on long-haul routes. It is called an auxiliary power unit, an APU, and its purpose is to provide the heat, electricity, and comfort of a running truck without running the main diesel engine. Here is why that matters. A standard Class 8 semi-truck burns roughly 0.8 gallons of diesel per hour at idle, solely to power its heating and electrical systems while parked. Over a 10-hour mandatory rest stop, that is 8 gallons of fuel burned while the truck goes nowhere. In a part of the world where the next fuel stop is 240 miles away and fuel costs significantly more than it does in the lower 48, idling is not just expensive. It can be
Enough to get
dangerous
there.
if it draws fuel reserves
move.
below what is needed to safely complete the run. Diesel-powered APUs solve this problem with remarkable efficiency. These compact units, mounted on the truck's frame, run their own small diesel engine to power a generator supplying electricity to the sleeper cab and a dedicated heating system. Their fuel consumption typically ranges between 0.1 and 0.5 gallons per hour, a fraction of what the main engine would consume at idle. For a 10-hour rest stop at 50 below, that might mean burning as little as 1 to 2 gallons of diesel total, rather than 8. On the Dalton Highway, that difference is not theoretical. It is the difference between completing a run and being stranded. But the
Heater's running
APU is
strong.
only part of the system. What experienced
We'll be all
Dalton
right in
drivers
here tonight.
understand is that at temperatures approaching 50 below, a diesel APU alone can be insufficient. The cold becomes so extreme that it begins to win against the heater's output. Not because the heater is underpowered, but because the sleeper berth loses heat faster than the unit can replace it if any gap exists in the cab's ceiling. Standard diesel fuel-fired bunk heaters like the S-Bar Airtronic units, common on trucks operating in this region, can output up to 7,500 BTU per hour at maximum setting. In a well-sealed sleeper berth, it is enough. Against a leak, it is not. This is why the pre-sleep ritual of an experienced Arctic driver is far more involved than it appears. Before that curtain is drawn, the driver walks the truck's exterior, checking for any gap in the cab ceiling that might allow outside air to intrude. They check fuel filters, which can begin to clog with wax crystals as diesel approaches its cloud point. The temperature at which paraffin wax suspended in the fuel begins to solidify. In the Prudhoe Bay region, winter diesel is specially formulated with a higher ratio of number 1 diesel to prevent gelling. But extreme temperature events can push even winterized fuel toward its limits. Some drivers carry diesel fuel treatment additives as insurance, pouring them into the tanks at every fuel stop as a matter of routine. Others rely on fuel line heaters installed on trucks, built for Arctic operation. Small electric elements that keep the critical pathway between the fuel tank and the engine warm enough to prevent restriction.
Keep it steady.
Then, there is the question of the
Not
main engine
dropping.
itself.
Not dropping.
This is perhaps the most counterintuitive element of the entire operation. At temperatures below 40 or 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, diesel engines can seize if allowed to cool completely. The oil in the crankcase, even winter-grade synthetic oil, thickens to a viscosity that makes cold start lubrication
The hum's
nearly
off.
impossible without preheating.
What was that?
If an Arctic driver's APU
Okay.
fails during the night,
Yeah,
which does
that's it.
happen, as any
All right,
mechanical system can
status.
fail,
Come on.
and the main
Critical.
engine is allowed to
APU's
cool
red.
to
Need to
ambient
shut her
temperature,
down. Prepare for
that driver
roadside
may be
diagnostic.
unable to restart it without external help. Help that is hundreds of miles away. Some trucks operating on this route are equipped with electric block heaters that keep the engine coolant warm by drawing power from the APU's generator. Others carry dedicated coolant heaters as backup. The layered
right,
redundancy
APU,
is not paranoia.
Connection's good, block
It
heater's
is
solid,
professional
fuel
discipline
lines,
developed through hard
everything holding
experience
up.
on a road where
Temperatures are
mistakes have
brutal.
consequences that are difficult to overstate. The Coldfoot Camp at mile 175 on the Dalton is a place that illustrates everything unique about this world. With a permanent year-round population of approximately 34 people as of the last census, it is described as the northernmost truck stop in the world. It was founded by Iditarod Musher Dick Mackay in 1981. He drove an old school bus up the Hall Road, installed a stove in the back, and began selling hamburgers and coffee to passing drivers. The truckers themselves, using surplus crates from loads bound for the North Slope, built the permanent structure around him. Today, it offers a cafe, a fuel depot, limited lodging, and a community bulletin board that drivers have used for decades to leave notes for each other about conditions on the road ahead. North of Coldfoot, there are no services for 240 miles until the industrial complex at Deadhorse, the town at the end of the road. Between those 2 points, drivers who exhaust their mandatory rest allowance park in whatever pullout the road provides. They manage their environment alone, without external support, in an expanse where the silence at night is unlike anything in the inhabited world. It is not merely quiet. It is the absence of the background acoustic texture that humans in populated places never notice until it is gone. No traffic, no voices, no wind in trees, because north of the Brooks Range, there are no trees. The boreal forest ends completely, and the landscape opens into hundreds of thousands of acres of tundra frozen solid and swept by winds that can gust past 60 miles per hour. Experienced North Slope drivers develop pre-sleep routines that would seem obsessive to an outsider, but that
I've
are,
got the signal.
in
It's
context, simply rational.
Copy
They
that.
verify
Proceed
their
with the
communication
transmission.
equipment. Satellite phones are standard
All
on this
right,
route
20
because cell
degrees.
coverage is essentially non-existent for most of the 414 miles.
Good to go.
They confirm the APU is running and the berth is reaching temperature before pulling the curtain. They lay out their cold weather gear in a specific reproducible arrangement so that if something goes wrong in the night and they need to exit the truck quickly, they're not fumbling in the dark for items they cannot locate. They have made these decisions in advance, which means they do not have to make them under stress. The sleeper berth in a modern long-haul truck is a more sophisticated environment than most people imagine. Standard full-size berths provide enough length for a person to sleep fully extended, with storage compartments, electrical outlets, and in many configurations a small infotainment system. Mattresses have improved dramatically over the past 2 decades, from thin foam pads that older drivers still recall bitterly, to multi-layer inner spring or memory foam units that allow for genuine, restorative sleep. The berth is sealed from the cab by a heavy curtain providing both thermal insulation and light blocking. In the Arctic winter, where polar darkness means no sunrise for weeks at a time, light blocking is irrelevant. The challenge is something else entirely: the persistent awareness of what lies outside. Many drivers on this route describe a form of mental calibration that develops over time. The first trips north, they report, involve a persistent low-level anxiety during rest stops, a consciousness of the temperature outside, of what it would mean for a heater to fail, of the distance to help. With experience, that anxiety does not disappear. It transforms into what might better be described as trained alertness.
I heard that.
An awareness that
you
runs in
hear
the
that?
background rather than the foreground.
Something changed.
That notices sounds the heating system should not be making. That registers when the temperature in the berth drops slightly, without escalating to panic. It is the difference between an
You just hope
amateur
you get
and a
there in one
professional.
piece.
Not the absence of fear, but the conversion of fear
Gotta
into
trust the
usable
road.
information. Approximately 3,700 large trucks travel the Dalton Highway every month, including through the deepest Arctic winter. In winter, traffic on the highway actually increases to around 250 trucks per day, because some sections accessible in summer become impassable when the ground thaws. And winter's solid freeze makes certain routes viable that cannot be driven any other time of year. The oil fields at Prudhoe Bay require a continuous supply of fuel, food, equipment, and materials to sustain the workers living and operating at the top of the continent. That supply chain does not pause when the temperature drops. It cannot.
Still
By
running.
morning, if
Temperature
everything has
is
gone as
holding
planned,
steady.
and for
Another
the most
successful
experienced
night.
drivers on this route, it usually does, the APU will have burned perhaps 2 gallons of fuel. The berth will be warm. The main engine, kept above freezing through the night by its block heater, will start without drama. The driver will eat whatever food they packed in Fairbanks, because there will be no diner or fast food stop between here and Dead Horse. They will run their pre-trip inspection in temperatures that punish exposed skin in under 2 minutes, climb back into the cab, and pull out onto the Dalton Highway. Outside, it will still be dark. It may stay dark for weeks yet, but the cargo has to move. And if surviving an Arctic winter at 50 below seems like the outer boundary of what a professional driver can face on this road, consider what happens when the threat is not cold, but fire. When a driver finds themselves on a 2-lane corridor in California, or Oregon, or Montana, with smoke so thick the GPS cannot be trusted, orange haze erasing the road markings, and somewhere in the trees ahead, a wildfire is moving faster than expected. Because extreme cold is only one chapter of this story, the next one burns.